What's up, guys? It's Ken here with Backbodymystery, and we're back again to complete part 2 of Storytime. So, just a quick little recap. He Who Remains made his first appearance in Store issue 245 in 1966. So, we're going to get right back into it. I'm going to pass it over to my narrator, which is my special guest, Ida. Let's get started.
With He Who Remains' death, the sacred timeline was reconnected to the greater multiverse, and numerous branching realities were rapidly created, which allowed the Council of Kings to gain access to the sacred timeline. As Kang the Conqueror was killed during a fight with Ant-Man, the Council concluded that the heroes got too close to destroying the dynasty they had built. The Council and every variant of theirs in existence to assemble in order to stop them. Loki found himself in the past of the Time Variance Authority, aka TVA, which only sped up the creation of branching timelines. Loki's experience with He Who Remains left a big impact on him, as he went on to describing He Who Remains as a dangerous and terrifying figure. As he and Mobius M. Mobius traveled to the branched timeline where the Victor Timely variant resided, Loki became fearful at the prospect of Timely being as dangerous as He Who Remains. Posthumous plans. As He Who Remains' body began to decompose in his chair, the TVA stopped pruning branched timelines, causing the temporal loom to overlay. At the same time, Loki began time slipping, an affliction granted to him by He Who Remains that had the trickster god uncontrollably transported across various points of time, while Miss Minute set out to enact her role in He Who Remains' contingency plan. Amassing a file on Victor Timely's whereabouts, she arranged for Ravonna Renslayer to meet with her in 1868 in Chicago, where Timely, who was He Who Remains' sacred timeline counterpart, resided. He Who Remains' orders consisted of the pair giving the TVA official handbook to Timely as a child, thereby creating a branched timeline and rendering the version of Timely who received the book as a variant who would study the science of the TVA. Miss Minutes and Renslayer believed that He Who Remains' intent was to have this Timely variant become his successor. However, when Timely rejected Miss Minutes' advances, she decided not to honor He Who Remains' wishes and chose to turn on Timely. Additionally, Miss Minutes showed Renslayer a video of He Who Remains ordering her memories to be wiped. This resulted in Renslayer joining Miss Minutes in the belief that He Who Remains did not deserve to have his variant becoming his successor, and thus chose to go against He Who Remains' contingency plans by deciding to rule over the TVA instead. Unbeknownst to them, He Who Remains had arranged for this very scenario, as his true intent for the creation of the Timely variant was not for Timely to work with Renslayer and Miss Minutes to become his successor. Instead, the true plan was for Timely to be recruited by Loki and the TVA as a means to fix the temporal loom, knowing full well that Timely would not succeed and that the destruction of several realities would prompt Loki to time slip before Sylvie killed him, thereby resurrecting him. Brief resurrection. With Victor Timely unable to scale the temporal loom to handle infinite branches, despite Loki having lived through centuries and having rewound time multiple times, Loki came to the conclusion that the only way to protect reality was to prevent Sylvie from killing He Who Remains. Loki then time slipped back to the Citadel at the end of time before Sylvie could kill him, thereby resurrecting He Who Remains in the temporal sense and fulfilling He Who Remains' true contingency plan. Loki attempted to convince Sylvie not to kill He Who Remains, although she refused to listen and stabbed He Who Remains. Loki then rewound time and unsuccessfully failed to convince Sylvie again, and continued to rewind time after each failed attempt in order to resurrect He Who Remains. Loki eventually asked He Who Remains why he sat by and watched Sylvie try to kill him without bothering to defend himself. He Who Remains then used his tent pad to freeze Sylvie in time and asked Loki how many times had he rewound time trying to save him. When Loki expressed shock at Sylvie being frozen, He Who Remains replied that he was surprised that Loki hadn't gained that ability yet. He Who Remains then divulged that he had paved the road for Loki to gain his time-slipping ability for the sole purpose of resurrecting him. disclosing that he never intended for Sylvie to permanently kill him, and adding that everything that Loki had gone through of late was part of the contingency plan that he had paved to ensure his return. Noting Loki's lack of retort, He Who Remains told Loki that since this was too much for the trickster god to process, he would restore Sylvie's agency, and that perhaps after a couple thousand more loops, Loki would be ready to have a conversation. However, Loki then paused time on Sylvie, not only revealing that he indeed had that ability, but that they had already had this conversation. Impressed, He Who Remains smiled and claimed that Loki was his favorite of the two variants in front of him. As Loki took a seat, He Who Remains notified Loki that he was well aware of Victor Timely's inability to fix the temporal loom. He Who Remains explained that the temporal loom was never intended to handle all the branch timelines, but a failsafe that would delete all of the branches, the TVA included, in order to save the sacred timeline. He Who Remains then added that his variants were already out there in the multiverse. Loki declared that he would destroy the loom before it could delete the branches and destroy the TVA, although He Who Remains reminded him that the loom prevented a brutal war from breaking out, where all realities, including the sacred timeline, would be destroyed. He Who Remains implored Loki to see reason, claiming that Loki had known peace in his life because He Who Remains had presided at the end of time, and that he got to rule over the timeline because he was capable of making the tough choices. When Loki once again declared that he would find another way, He Who Remains informed Loki that he would have to make one of two tough choices: allow Sylvie to kill him, thereby leading to the scenario where the loom becomes overloaded and allows for a multiversal war where they would all die, or kill Sylvie so that he and Loki could work together to protect the sacred timeline. However, Loki chose to time slip away from the Citadel, eventually returning to the point in time before the loom exploded. In doing so, Loki restored history to the version where Sylvie had killed He Who Remains, thereby undoing He Who Remains' resurrection. Dethroned by Loki. Having returned to the TVA office right before the temporal loom exploded, Loki decided to forge a third option for himself, where he would destroy the loom itself, releasing the infinite branches of the multiverse from its grip. As the branches began to die, Loki used his magic to revive them before transporting them, along with himself, to the Citadel at the end of time. Loki then sat upon He Who Remains' throne and chose to hold the branches of the universe, or the multiverse, himself for all time, allowing both the sacred timeline and the branch timelines to coexist, while giving the TVA a chance to defend themselves against the variants of He Who Remains, who would one day arrive. The end.
There you have it, guys. Hope you enjoyed that story time with my special guest narrator, Ida. Slap, like, and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys next time.